Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed that introduction. I was doing this tier 39 nightmare dungeon and I realized there's like a 20 level difference between my character and this dungeon, and I'm running it quite easily. I mean, I think I died once at the end of it. I think it was just because I wasn't paying attention for a while. I got like a message or something, but this build has been doing very well at like third level, everything around level 35 or tier 35 to 40 nightmare dungeons has been running pretty easily. I mean, the combo here, it's the charge bolt almost instantly kills even the strongest of elites. Here you can see I'm not killing it instantly. This is until it gets vulnerable, and then it just shreds. I mean, he just dies almost instantly. And if they take one charge bolt while they're vulnerable and stunned, they're dead. Especially if all 5 the things hit, it's like a shotgun. Why is this? Well, basically, I've been stacking vulnerable damage and damage while stunned, and my whole build is built around stunning enemies, dealing as much lightning damage as possible, and getting those charge bolts hit in their face, and you can see they just melt away. Another key part of this build is critting, and because of one of the passives that I chose in the tree, I can crit all the time. I think I got like a base crit chance of 27%, which also means that 104 abilities will just crit. And then with the 3% for every hit spell, I think every damage instance I do will give 3% for all the lightning spells. It's just constantly getting crits, and it's very easy to get them, and they deal massive amounts of damage. The combo with the vulnerable and stunned makes a big damage instance, and then I've got a 25% increased damage to stunned enemies from the charge bolts just in there as well. So this is just constantly stacking damage. As for my enchantments, I've got the Lash enchantment and the charge bolt enchantment. Now every time I stun, it will spawn charge bolts, and every time that I use a cooldown, it will also create a stun effect, meaning that if I use a cooldown when someone's nearby, I'll get a barrier and I'll stun them, which means my next charge bolt will do insane amount of damage. Additionally, all of your casts from unstable currents, which will use a cooldown, will also trigger this, which will trigger more barriers and then in turn more stuns. We move on to the items. So as for my staff, it has a lot of lightning critical strike damage, which is amazing. Good roll on it as well. Intelligence is always great. It wasn't the best roll, but I'm happy with it nonetheless. Ultimate skill damage, this will make my ultimate really pop off, but I think I can have something else for this, but it's decent on there. Core skill damage is great. I have 84%, so that's also a pretty good roll. And then as for the imprint, it's 50% increased damage while you have a barrier. Now this synergizes very well with the passive in your skill tree that gives you a barrier every time you use a cooldown for 2 seconds. And you have your barrier for 6 seconds from your ice barrier. So getting barriers up is almost constant, which means this is a 50% damage increase, just always. And most of the time you have a barrier up, as you can see in this video. Just look at my health bar, you'll see a barrier for most of the time. My cooldowns will keep refreshing, I'll keep posting them, and I'll have that 50% damage buff up for almost all the time, which is insane. 50% damage just getting on there, it's great. Then as for the boots, max movement speed, 4 ranks in Frost Nova, reducing its cooldown by I think around 3 seconds. And then the imprint getting movement speed after teleport. The teleport cooldown is quite low, especially if you teleport inside of a group of enemies. It's reduced by 3 seconds more, so this will be up quite a lot of time, which will keep you moving quite a lot. And then every time you attack, reduce your evade cooldown by 1.2 seconds. Which means that your EV will be up constantly while in battle. Then as for the pants, these are really my defensive item. I really got everything defensive on there. Damage reduction against distant enemies, max roll on the damage reduction again while injured. Total armor increase, which armor is great by the way. And then the imprint getting 20% damage reduction every time you do a basic skill, which you'll be doing quite often, so you'll be having this up almost permanently, then getting some maximum life in there with some pretty good rolls. The only thing I thought that the potions give movement speed while injured, there are some better things to get for this, but it's nice to have some extra move speed. You're probably running away if you're low health anyhow, so having the extra move speed is great. As for the gloves, I haven't found a better ancestral one because these gloves were just that good. They've got lightning critical strike damage, critical strike chance, attack speed and charge bolts. Just ideal things I want. There's And also good rolls on all of them. Well, maybe not the lightning strike damage, but good rolls on the attack speed, good rolls on the critical strike chance, and a nice imprint on there. I think 32%, that's amazing for just stun damage in general. Also stacking with the whole build in general. So these gloves, almost impossible to find better ones, which is why I don't have ancestral ones with the charge ball +4. That's the only thing I could improve. But other than that, they have all the stats I want on there. Chest piece, another defensive item, but on this one I actually did get some shock skill damage, but the other 3 stats are all just defensive. Maximum life is great, which scales with your barriers as well. That's a very good synergy. The damage from close and damage from distant, both are pretty good rolls, especially the distant is a literal max roll. Then for the imprint, every time you take direct damage, you have a 6% chance to reset the cooldowns for your defensive skills. This is great because then your Frost Nova and your teleport and your barrier will go up again once you got hit too many times, especially when you're stunned. This is great. So it can happen that your teleport is on cooldown, which is your only unstoppable. So when you're stunned and you get hit a couple of times, then you can get your Frost Barrier or Frost Nova or your teleport out of the cooldown again, and then you can cast it, getting you that escape you desperately need. Because also your cooldowns mean that you can barrier, which means you can stabilize and get out of a risky situation. This has helped me many times. Then as for the helmet, maximum life, this is great. Life regeneration, well, not damaged recently, not that good because it takes quite a long time before my full health gets charged full, so this is quite a dumb stat. The cooldown reduction is great though. It's got 11.8%. That's great for the cooldown reduction because your ultimate you want to be up all the time, and also you have 3 cooldowns then, which you also want to be up as many times as possible. So you would just want to be keep casting these, and cooldown reduction on your head is almost essential. It's great reroll. Then dexterity, it's great for the nodes, but for other than that, it's for Paragon. Then the aspect is pretty good. I think pretty good is quite an understatement. Actually, it's quite broken. You can keep this up for 100% for most of the time, which means that your armor will almost be, I think because I have 10% armor on my amulet as well, I think my armor is almost fully stacked almost all of the time. And when I'm fighting, you can see this damage number, and it's hovering around the 60-70, but especially in a prolonged fight with lots of enemies, this will easily get to 100, or yeah, as you can see now, it will reach the 100, and it keeps there for quite a while. Another one of the items that are completely broken in my build is my amulet. It's got great rolls, 814 item power, which is almost the max. It's got 21 reduced damage from close enemies, this is great, but +3 in the glass cannon passive, this is I think like 18% increased damage. Yeah, you also get 9% increased damage, but 80% just multiplicative increased damage on your amulet, insane. 10% intelligence, which just scales with your Paragon Board, that's a great intelligence on there. And then I have the reroll of 10% total armor. I do want to reroll this to cooldown reduction, but the 10% increased armor is also really good. I think this will allow me to reach the maximum armor cap quite easily. Then as for the imprint, unstable current is not active. Your shock skills have a 15% chance to trigger a free cast from it. This is quite good. This basically means you have like 1/7 of your ultimate constantly up. 1 in every 7 skills, or well, I think 1 every 6, yeah, 1 over 7 skills will just automatically cast another skill as well, which means that sometimes when you're not even using your ultimate, you will gain like the lightning spear stunning enemies, which also synergizes with your build very well. And this is basically what you want. You want, or 1 in every few times, what you will have a charge bolt that will also spawn another charge bolt. Double damage basically. So this is very good and has a lot of synergy with all of the other spells in your build. As for my left ring, it's got all of the stats I want. I think barrier generation is actually quite underestimated here. 20% of my barrier regeneration. Because I'm doing so many barriers, it's actually not a dumb stat. It's actually quite a good stat. Then we have the critical strike damage and the critical strike chance. Although the critical strike chance is a bit on the lower side, it's still pretty good. Vulnerable damage, amazing. Also very good roll on it. And then another 20% multiplicative, yes, multiplicative increase damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier, which is almost constantly, which means you will be doing even more damage to vulnerable enemies, which we want, especially in this build. Then, as for my last ring, it has the damage to stunned enemies, damage to injured enemies. I'm not too sure about the injured enemies, but it has also has the critical strike damage, which is great, and 30% more vulnerable damage, which we stack all the time. Although it doesn't have any crit chance, I would like the crit chance instead of the injured enemies. It's still a great ring nonetheless. Then it has critical strikes with your core skills, which is we're constantly doing critical strikes with core skills. Remember the critical strike chance that we're stacking and plus the passive that we have. And then we're getting 23% attack speed for 5 seconds, which scales off of your arc lash, and your charge bolts also scale off of attack speed as an attack speed multiplier of I think 1.25 or scalar. So that means that you cast that quicker as well, which is great for your whole build, and this is why we have it on the ring. And as for the skill tree, I'll just quickly gloss over it. Arc Lash, we've got the reduced cooldown upgrade, and of course 5 points in there. Charge bolts with the damage to stunned enemies. Then as for the defensive tree, we've taken quite a lot of points. The teleport with the damage reduction for 3 seconds. A glass cannon fully leveled, and also 3 from the amulet. Then the ice barrier or ice armor, and with the mana increased in generation, which is great. More mana regeneration means more spells. Frost Nova all the way maxed because we want to get this up as many times. This is our vulnerable damage and also one of our biggest damage sources with that. Then finally we have 1 point in Elemental Attunement, which means there's a 5% chance that on crit you reset one of your defensive cooldowns, which is great, and we will definitely proc this every 10 seconds. Then later on come the Conjuration tree. We've got lucky hit chance because when you lucky hit you can proc stuns, which then also with your Paragon Board you get more mana, and it synergizes very well with everything. And for lightning spears, actually we've got the invoked lightning spear, which stuns enemies for 2 seconds. This means on critical striking, but this means that your eventually your lightning spear will just be constantly, as you can see here, my lightning spear will just fly around and constantly stun people because it starts critical striking and it gains critical strike chance each time it critical strikes. So eventually it will just be a 100% critical strike chance lightning spear that's just flying around and stunning people. This is great, and it synergizes very well with the build, and with the aspect on your amulet you have a 15% chance to get one of the 4 lightning spells, which is one of them is the lightning spear, and this will then stun anything. So this synergizes very well with other builds or with the other things in your build. Then further on with the mastery skills, Bald Lightning and Enhanced Bald Lightning. I don't really know about these 2 skill points. I think it's quite nice just to have some skill points in there, but and it skills with your attack speed, but I'm not sure. I might choose to get these 2 skill points in somewhere else, maybe in some damage reduction, because later on you might die instantly from damage. Then we've also got Shocking Impact. This is great. Every time you stun, you do 45% of your damage. This is great because then every time you start stunning people, you also deal quite a lot of damage. And you know that lightning spear that's flying around stunning everything, now it deals 45% damage extra every time it stuns, which is basically all the time you're critting a lot. Then you've got Unstable Currents with Prime Unstable Currents, which means more attack speed. This is great, everything scales with it. And all of the 3 passive in here are fully scaled, so you get 3% critical strikes on every hit. Electrocution, which is 15% damage reduction on crits. This is great. Convulsion, which is 9% chance to stun on every shock skill. This is great. Every shock skill now has a chance to stun on lucky hit, so this is why we also took the lucky hit earlier. And then on the end we have Verse Mastery, which is just damage reduction and increased damage to close range. We're always close range, so this is always up. Critical striking, we're doing that at least every 3 seconds, so this is also increased by 25%. Great. Then as for the Paragon Board, I started out with the Exploit socket. That's the only glyph that I've actually got maxed out to level 15. I took as many as the dexterity things I could get for vulnerable damage, because as you know, vulnerable damage is very important in this build. Then for the second board I took the Static Surge legendary node. It was one of the first one, obviously getting the damage to stunned enemies, and also getting the other stunned enemies nodes that are in there. And for the glyph socket, I took a destruction glyph. Getting that extra critical strike damage is of course great for core skills, and it's one of the only things that actually scales with that. I haven't leveled that one because you can't get the second bonus from this in just the base skills. You actually need to upgrade it to 1+ to get the 1, 2, 3 extra dexterity nodes that are on there to get the second bonus. So I thought, yeah, I'll just level that later. And the one I'm leveling right now is the third one, which is the page to the left of my legendary node with the static surge. It's the Enchantment Master. In this I got the few nodes for the non-physical damage, which is great. One of the first things I got there was the non-physical damage, and then another one of non-physical damage with the Imbiber, which is great because you're constantly having barriers up, so you'll probably be healthy. And it's a 35% damage buff, which is quite insane. 35% is a lot. The extra bonus is increased potion healing, which helps because we don't have any healing in our build. So extra potion healing is always great for survivability and getting that health buff, healthy status up. And of course I did take the 4% resistance, although the 4% resistance isn't optimized because resistance is quite weird. The 10 intelligence is quite nice. Then finally, there was still one unique item that I wanted to talk about. I didn't include it into this build, but actually it's not even that optimal, but it's quite nice for clearing, especially for the AoE. The thing about Charge Bolt is that all of the things hit just one person, but there's a unique for that. Charge Bolts start piercing people if you use the Ancestral Unique Staff of Lam Essen. With this, it will deal 30% less damage, and you have the locked kind of stats that are on the staff, which is one of the biggest downsides. But I've got a quite nice one, 782 item power and only a 32% reduction. The damage is quite nice because it starts penetrating the enemies, which also triggers the 25% extra damage if it hits with 3 bolts or more, and you start actually spamming that, and it makes a lot of sound as well, but it does quite a lot of damage, and you start hitting multiple mobs. But is it really better than the single target? Because you're losing quite a lot of damage, especially my staff has like 60% critical strike damage, which is quite a lot to lose. You do gain like 36 lightning damage, damage to close range enemy, injured enemies, and a chance to restore primary resource, which means that with the legendary node you can actually spam your abilities quite well. This is quite satisfying and quite as nice as well, but I would say you could switch it up. But especially against bosses, it's worse. I would say most of the time I'm running the normal thing and just doing that. So that was the video. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this helped, and see you in the next video.